Okay, folks, we're going to move into chapter 7, and we're going to look at the Roman Empire and the artwork that spread throughout the Roman Empire. This video is going to be focusing on the Republic, which is going to be 753 to 27 BCE. BCE. So this is going to be the time period of the Roman Republic as around the same time as the classical period that we'll see during the Greek time. Okay, so there's going to be three main areas we're going to look at in regards to the Republic. And then this is going to spread throughout the other time periods of the Roman Empire, moving into the actual empire itself. So this will be the Republic leading up to the Roman Empire. And the three main areas of art are going to be architecture, painting, and sculpture. Those are the three main staples of art and visual arts in particular. So those are going to be the three areas that we're going to talk about specifically. And to begin, we'll start with architecture, then we'll look at sculpture, then we'll look at painting. All right. And what I want you to look at to begin is figure 7.3. And figure 7.3 is going to have some early derivative styles that we'll see pre the Republic. And these are going to be styles that are going to happen in Italy that's going to be a little separate from what was happening in Greece. Now, if you notice right away with figure 7.3, you can see that the Temple of Portinus is an Ionic order. It has those Ionic columns. The capitals are Ionic. You can see it has a pediment as well, and that raking roof that runs all the way back from the west to the east. Now, one thing that's really going to make this Italian, derived from the, again, pre-Republic area or time period, which is called the Etruscan, or from the Etruscan area, is the raised porch. All right, so the stairs are only happening in the front. They're not happening in the side front. And if you recall when we were talking about the temples in the past, that wherever you see the columns is where the entrance points will be. This is a prose style, but the steps are only in the very front. They're not on the sides either. And another thing that is happening with this temple structure is a new type of style. Not just a prose style, but a new type of style. And whenever you see these temples that have these raised porches and also have columns along the side that go all the way around, but a series of those columns are called engaged columns, like we see on the side of the Temple of Portinus, where the columns are engaged, meaning that they're still part of the wall and they're not fully freestanding. And when those engaged columns are present in the temple, but they're still visually going all the way around, and some of the columns are completely in the round in the front on the porch of the temple, that's called a pseudo-peristyle. So you remember peristyle is where the columns go all the way around, but a pseudo-peristyle is going to be the same columns going all the way around, but a majority of the columns that you see are going to be engaged within the temple wall. So instead of them being all the way around full circle throughout the whole temple, and they're also in the round, a large portion of those columns are going to be engaged, meaning that they're going to be incorporated in the wall of the temple. So look thoroughly at figure 7.3 to see the Temple of Portinus as an example of that pseudo-peristyle, and how they're deriving the Ionic orders from Greece, as well as the pediment development and the continuous frieze. So that's what they're taking from Greece. But what they're doing with those acquisitions of style is they're coupling them with an old Italian technique pre-Republic during the Etruscan period, which is a raised roof or raised porch where the entrance is just in the front, and then they're creating that pseudo peristyle, which is where some of the columns are in the round and they're freestanding in the round and they're going around the perimeter of the building or of the temple, but then a majority of them are going to be again engaged in the wall structure of the temple. I repeat that over and over again for this video because that's going to become very important in the design of future temples and future structures that we're going to see during the Republic or during the Roman Empire. And that this temple of Portinus is a really great example of a precursor of what is to come. Okay? Another thing I want you to see is figure 7.6. And what the Romans are going to do is they're going to take an old technique that was being used below ground for catacombs and places for burying the dead. And it was used prior to these new advents where there would be tunnel systems in the ground and catacombs would be placed throughout the earth in the ground to bury folks that had passed away. And what they're going to do is they're going to take that technique, again, figure 7.6, and they're going to raise it up. They're going to take that technique they used underground and they're going to bring it above ground. And here's a series of different engineering vaults, or what are called vaults, that are going to be developed and used to build temple structures as well as different engineering facets to temples, and also in the future churches during Constantine's time, which will be at the very end of the chapter 7. And the first is a barrel vault. And a barrel vault is a continuous parabola from the bottom side all the way to the other side. And it has a keystone in the middle which locks that inverted parabola, that inverted U shape, and it makes it extremely strong, and it can withstand a lot of pressure and height coming from above. So they're going to learn how to engineer using this barrel vault system as the basic vault, like a vaulted ceiling, a basic vault to design the infrastructure of their temples. And in future, they'll start using them for the churches as well. So know these figures, again, beginning with the barrel vault, which is just a very simple curve from one side to the other that's continuous, that can withstand the counter pressure of anything above it, which will make them be able to build their temples and then in the future their cathedrals and churches really, really tall. And then that barrel vault, when you have 4 small barrel vaults that converge into one point, it's called a groin vault. And you can see that's next to the barrel vault, again in figure 7.6. And then that groin vault is the area of the structure where you go one of the 4 directions, right? So that convergence point is an engineering convergence point so that the attendants within that temple can either go this way, that way, north, south, east, or west. All right? And then it becomes even more elaborate, the vaulted system. You can see in the fenestrated sequence of groin vaults that the vaulted ceilings are much higher, and they're have extensions or appendages of smaller vaults that are coming off the top of them, which is creating glass, or it's creating openings in those small appendages that are extending off of the main curved vault, the main barrel vault that's running down the middle. And with those small appendages, that are coming off the sides of that main tunnel is where they can start incorporating openings and then in time glass. Put glass inside of those vaults to give it a sense of illumination inside of the temples and the cathedrals and the churches, which is going to be a very important element to their architecture in the future, is having illumination inside of the temples and inside the cathedrals to give a sense of light, which will give a sense of a divine presence, right? So the Romans are going to be very much the engineers. They're going to be very much the ones that are going to come up with these designs that can be above the ground and withstanding pressure, weight, weather, all that stuff, which is why we see a lot of these buildings still present in Italy and throughout the Roman Empire. And then ultimately they're going to work towards a hemispherical dome with an oculus in the middle. And we're going to look at a piece of artwork that's very important within the Roman Empire. And it is one of these domes. It's called the Pantheon, not the Parthenon. So in Greek we have the Parthenon, and in Roman art we have the Pantheon. And the Pantheon is going to be this hemispherical dome with this oculus in the middle. And it's this opening that allows a beam of sun to come in and just kind of move around the inside of the dome space, which gives it a sense of like this beam of light illuminating the inside, which again is that play with this illumination and this presence of maybe a divine source. But with the hemispherical dome, they're going to learn how to use a certain material that they're going to rediscover and use, and that's concrete. They're going to learn how to use concrete and be able to create first with stone and then come back with this form of this public works design out of concrete. So they're going to learn how to do this civil engineering and these designs in society throughout the Roman Empire with the advent of concrete. And they're going to be able to really expand these vaulting systems as well as this dome with the use of that material, alongside fired brick as well as stone, of course. So that is going to be the main architectural element of what we're going to be looking at throughout the Roman Empire, and this is going to be beginning with the Republic. Then we're going to look at sculpture, and what's going to happen with sculpture in the Republic is going to be realism, right? They're going to focus on having every little detail present based off of the person. They want it to look real. They're going to take certain techniques like the contrapposto and the shifting of the hip and the organic drapery that you see with the Greeks, but they're going to emphasize the importance of super realism with the actual human features like the face and the arms and the legs whenever it comes to the individual that they're sculpting. And the word that we use for this super realism that they're interested in is verism. V-E-R-I-S-M. Verism. Again, like I said, there's going to be derivatives coming from Greece, just like there were derivatives in Greece coming from Egypt, and there were derivatives in Egypt coming from Mesopotamia. So they're all kind of taking certain techniques and going along with it and utilizing what they want, appropriating it, and then combining it with their own personal interests. And the Romans were very interested in that verism, or that realism, that super realism about each person. They weren't interested in the idealism, in this idyllic kind of standard of what perfection is supposed to look like. They're more interested in what the individual looks like. So I want you to look at figure 7-7 and figure 7-8. And figure 7-7 is the man with the portrait bust of his ancestors. And what's really exciting about this is not just that verism and that realism that you see in his face, but also showing the bust sculptures that he's holding and the realism of his ancestors and of the individuals from which he has come from. So it's giving this historical importance. And according to the Romans, and during this Republic period in particular, history and historical connection to ancestors and family is more important than your direct connection with looking idyllic or directly connected to a divine source. It's more about your own connection to your heritage. And so, man with portrait bust of his ancestors is an example of that. And what I want you to see and what I want you to know is to be able to describe and know that if you zoom in on figure 7.7 and look at his face and look at the faces of the bust sculptures that he's holding and he's leaning up against, you can see the depth of realism coming through in those faces. All right, there's a little bit of a smirk or a little bit of a smile, but there's none of that archaic smile. There's none of that focus on trying to make the human body look like a mathematical formula. It's more about trying to show what that human body and what those human expressions and faces actually look like. There's no, they're balding, so there's no hiding of the aging and the wisdom of the individual. It's all very much present. Like what we saw in the end of chapter 5 with ancient Greece, and you look at one of the philosophers and one of the orators that is speaking, and he's leaning to the side, and it's showing his realism. So even the Greeks were starting to shift into this veristic way of sculpting, and the Romans are going to start here right away. There's not going to be any archaic developments. There's not going to be any orientalizing. There's not going to be any of this classical way of developing the human. It's going to be very keen on realism, super realism, called verism. But you should know with figure 7.7 how that organic drapery and how that left leg, which is pivoted to the side, and as if his hip is twisted in that contrapposta way, is being pulled from the Greek period, from ancient Greek. And look at figure 7.8 and again be able to explain that verism. Be able to explain that super detail and how it's very specific to this Roman Republic period. Showing the importance of the individual, showing the importance of the personalized position that this person has. It's not about this ideal connection to legend, allegory, parable, or myth, or divinity. It's about what that individual actually does for that republic society in Italy or in Rome. And this is dating 50 to 30 BCE. So this is one of the Republican priests. And there's no attempt to represent the Republican priest in a youthful way, in this ideal way. It's very much the history and the wisdom and the activities and duties that this priest has had that's represented in his face, that's represented in the way in which he's carved. There is an interest in the organic drapery with the hood of the priest that is up around the top of his head. So again, pulling that from the Greek techniques of sculpting using organic drapery, but it's very much about the attitude of what that priest has done for so many years in his life as a priest of the Republic. And that verism, again, that superrealism, is what's of interest, trying to show all the blemishes, trying to show all the markings, showing the lines in the skin, showing the age of the individual and the time that has been spent in that specific personalized duty as a Republican priest. All right? So, those are the two main sculptures that I want you to know in regards to Republic sculpture. Then, what we're going to get into is we're going to get into paintings. And there's going to be four main types of paintings during the Republic. and they're going to expand out throughout other periods of the Republic art and during the Republic Empire as well. So there's going to be four, and they're literally going to be called styles. So you're going to have the first style, you're going to have a second style, a third style, and a fourth style. All right, it's pretty self-explanatory. One, two, three, four. And I'm just going to read to you here the difference between the four styles. Then I'm going to tell you what figures you should look at in the PowerPoint to best understand those styles. With the first of all, these are frescoes. And frescoes is a wet plaster and pigment paint technique. So they'll apply a wet plaster, and as it's drying a little bit, they'll come in with the pigment to give it the color. And then whenever that plaster dries, it seals the pigment in it. And then over time, what will happen with the plaster is it will create a crystalline structure on the surface and give it this feeling of illumination. So we'll see the fresco come in during the Renaissance period with the rebirth of antiquity during the Renaissance. But that's how the fresco worked. It was a gypsum plaster covering, molding with the plaster, shaping it, and after shaping it, adding the paint color, the pigment into it, and allowing it to dry to give it the painting-like quality. It's kind of like a three-dimensional painting technique. So what I want you to know about these frescoes, this fresco style is in the first style, it's going to be using the plaster and the stucco to make faux marble panels, reliefs. And the reason they're making faux marble panel reliefs is because they do not have access to the marble like the Greeks did. But they want to show that type of technique that the Greeks had using marble, like you saw with the friezes and the temples and such. But they didn't have access to marble. So what they'll do is they'll use materials like stucco and plaster and even I think what's called tufu, not tofu, but tufu. And they'll coat these kind of ivory-like materials on the top of their cement, on top of stone, and top of barren walls to make it look like they have these marble features. And so with style one, what they're going to do is they're going to design faux marble panels. That's just going to be the very basic, simple look of first style. And what I want you to look at is figure 717 as an example of that first style. And you'll see what I mean. It's very simple geometric paneling using that plaster and stucco with that pigment on top to give it that look of kind of this expanded border. So no, figure 717 is an example of that first style. And first style will not go out of style. It will keep coming back and be incorporated different ways throughout the Roman art period. Then the second style, after around 80 BCE to around 15 BCE, so before 80 BCE it was just the first style. And then around, so that would be somewhere around 750 BCE to around 80 BCE was just first style. Then around 80 BCE, a second style of painting is going to come in. And the second style is actually going to be a lot of imagery, a lot of figurative, narrative, and imaginative imagery. All right? It's going to be imagery that is just very mythological and then also just very atmospheric. So you'll see the mythological or the imagery coming from, and they were polytheistic, so they believed in the multitude of gods. And figure 718 is a second style example of that. All right? And you'll see that on the bottom of this imagery is the Dionysiac mystery frieze, the second style painting. You'll see on the bottom of where all these god-like figures are is a border that is almost paneled like in nature, and that's that first style. But then the imagery and the images of these mythological allegorical figures is that second style coming into play. And then another example of second style is going to be figure 720. And you can see that there's no figures, there's no people or mythological figures play. It's all atmospheric. It's just this imaginary world with this fig-like tree in the center of it, and everything else is just this imaginary ambient-like environment that's surrounding these floral designs. So second style was very imaginative. It was very kind of not abstract, but definitely more loose than just the simple paneling that you see in first style. All right, and then third style will be very simplistic and very minimal. Figure 721 is that example. It's just very much about being monochromatic, meaning that it's just really uses one color and changes the coloration of the hue, saturation of that one color, and gives a variety of colors based off of one hue. All right, so that's what we call monochromatic. Mono means one, chromatic means color. So finding ways to get different variations of color based off of one color choice. All right, and it's very linear and very simple. Okay, and there's nothing faux or fake about it. They're not trying to use the plaster or the stucco or the tufu to develop fake marble paneling looks. They're just keeping it very simple, very flat, very linear, and very simple in color. So remember third style as a very simplistic and minimal way of designing and painting. Then the fourth style is just going to be everything. It's going to have elements of the first style, it's going to have elements of the second style, and the third. All right, and the main thing that we want to know about the fourth style is that it's crowded, it's complex, and it has a multicolored style. And it's a sum of all the other styles. All right, so, and it's very fragmented in look. Like the imagery is very fragmented. And if you look at figure 722, it's a really great example of fourth style. It's crowded with a whole bunch of different bordered off images. Some of them are very third style and linear in nature. Some of them are boarded off with first style patterns and panels that are surrounding little pictures of imaginative imagery of these figures, and they're all interlocking and very fragmented. So if you would treat each different panel of imagery and color as if it's a different window, and you would look through it, and then you would look at the next window next to it, or the next image next to it, and think of that as a window, none of it connects. It's all disjointed. It's very complex and fragmented. So when you see figure 722, that's going to let you know that it's fourth style, is that complete fragmentation. So I want you to look at 722 and be able to compare it to figure 717 and see how the styles have developed from the first style to the fourth style. All right, and then the first style with figure 717 was very much just about faux paneling, creating three-dimensional shapes to make it look like they're marble, and then painting them with pigment, with that plaster. And then it became more flat and more imaginative in second style with figure 718. Then it became and then also in figure 720, and then it became very simplistic and minimal, and none of those complexities and those imaginative things are really present in the third style, which is 721. And then in 722, they just bring it all together. They take this whole history of all these styles and just incorporate it all. And that's figure 722, fourth style. And that's where I'll leave you on this video, and then we'll get into the Roman art during the Roman Empire next. So everything that I mentioned today is the Republic, which is the prior time period before the Roman Empire begins. Okay,